Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kiran Budrani. I'm the facilitator for today on our topic on online discussions as part of our Keep Teaching webinars this week on pedagogy. We're going to begin by, just for those who are new, just kind of talking about what's the difference between Canvas assignments and Canvas discussions, right? There's these options on Canvas where a discussion is really also an assignment, but in technical terms, an assignment is a closed assignment where the instructor assigns something to the students submit work, and only the instructor sees it. Discussions, on the other hand, are open assignments, right? They're open, publicly viewable assignments where students are posting certain things, and everyone gets to see responses to these questions. So just go through in the screen, you'll see that. Let's look at the assignment first on the left. So when it comes to an assignment, it's quite simple as a format. The faculty posts some question prompts. These are assigned to students, and the students respond to these questions. By nature, assignments are one-to-one. They're individualized. Even if it's the same assignment, it's still going to always be one-to-one. But if we move our mindset from maybe students can engage in discussions online, the dynamics of discussions changes the way assignments are conducted from one-to-one to open group. So in terms of a structure, the faculty engages the class with a prompt. This is under faculty-led discussion, the second column. Faculty engage the class in a prompt. Students would respond to this initial prompt, but we are also encouraging that students will interact with one another, hoping to respond to each other's prompts, and the faculty's role is to moderate and respond to some of these. So there's a lot more layers to a discussion, and sometimes it has more back and forth between the faculty and students. Now, some discussions can also be student-led, where instead of the faculty coming up with a prompt, the students can come up with a prompt, right? But it follows the same pattern as the students engage a class in a prompt. Maybe you have a group that's assigned to facilitate a discussion for a certain week. That group becomes the facilitator, and the rest of the class remain as responders. So that student group or that student, individual student engages the class with a prompt, students respond, they interact with each other, and the student facilitator or student facilitator group may be tasked with the role to moderate. So that's a bit more advanced level discussions. So as you think about your varieties of discussions, those that are more experienced with doing online discussions may want to try student-led discussions. If it's your first time to try out discussion, you might want to be in charge first, just to get your hands wet on how discussions work through online learning. So what are some of the opportunities for doing online discussions as compared to face-to-face? I know in this time where we are rapidly going online, it's not really a conversation to have whether we have a choice between face-to-face and online. Online is our default for the meantime, temporarily. However, it's good to just understand the opportunities or affordances of the discussions feature that our Canvas provides us. Now, so number one, online discussions can encourage greater interactions among classmates and a higher level of thinking. Let's just look at the first row. Under face-to-face, in a face-to-face setting, we assume that discussions are class discussions, and typically discussions happen as the faculty is presenting content in a mini lecture or some format of a presentation. Through the presentation, faculty would ask questions to the class and students answer immediately. So the nature of this discussion is a very brief discussion. Answers are to the minute or two. And it's likely, if it's a lecture class, a few students can participate during this discussion. not everybody will participate. Now, if we look at the online setting, discussions become asynchronous, right? It's not happening at the same time as the faculty is presenting content. And this allows the student a different way of discussing. Number one, discussions can have deeper thought and more time. So it can span over a series of days or even series of weeks, depending on the nature of the discussion. And students are able to construct longer, deeper, thoughtful responses, almost like mini essays if you think about it. And the best part of it is everybody participates. Discussions become an all-class activity rather than in a selected students participating. Now, let's look at the second row. In the second row, discussions by Canvas are technology supported. So if there are discussions happening in the classroom, these are a bit informal, they're ad hoc. They're never really documented because they are by nature informal. But in Canvas discussions, the nature of discussions are so formalized, right? There's a formal prompt, there's a structure in place. Students are given due dates to respond. Students are given due dates to facilitate. There is a stronger sense of formality, but this also, on the other hand, promotes students to collaborate in different ways. Maybe they have not posted or talked to each other. If you have a large class, this allows more students to interact with others. Also, it documents ideas that come up among the class. And thirdly, discussions now, because it's formalized, has the opportunity to be graded. And students can receive credit for the deeper thought and deeper construction of responses that they do for several days. So it's pretty nice. Actually, my joke is we never really use this format in a face-to-face classroom. Even though we say it's a discussion, these deep discussions that happen over time online are really like open assignments, because they're more formalized. So the goal for this workshop, this webinar, is to help you create better discussion questions online. Sometimes even better than what you have in the classroom. But the underlying thing is really dependent on how you conceptualize your discussion prompt and how you write it. So today we're going to go through 8 types of discussion prompts so that you could see how your students can move from lower level thinking or lower level discussions towards higher level discussions, where it requires a lot more deeper thought or critical thinking. So it's kind of, this list is not in a fixed order, but it's somewhat ordered from lower level to higher level. So we're going to go through each one. And as we go through each, we have some examples of discussion prompts. And I want you to think about, if you are thinking of a discussion, where really do you fall? What number are you in? Is your question falling under number 1? Is your falling under number 3? So, or so forth. So towards the end, I'm going to ask you to think about some questions, and then I'll ask some engagement later. But I'd like to spend the next 20 minutes, or at least 15 minutes, so that we have time for questions, to go through some of the examples so that you could see the differences across different types of discussion prompts. So let's look at the first one. The first one is your discussion prompt is based on students having to explicitly identify or check knowledge. So, for example, you might have a discussion prompt where students were given an activity to do some reading and watching a video on something. Our topic for the example is online learning, and using the content they're receiving from the reading and from the video, you are asking them to discuss online these things, like describing the 4 types of online learners and listing the skills or knowledge that effective online teachers must have. So by nature, we analyze the prompt, right? Just take a moment to analyze the prompt. The prompt is simply asking the students, based on the reading, what are the types of learners that were presented, describe these, and then list what the video and reading said about effective online teachers. So here we're just doing some kind of knowledge check with the students, but we're using the discussion forum as a way for them to post their answers. The intent here is to probe whether students were able to understand these basic concepts. So this is the lowest level discussion where students are not thinking on their own, but rather using a reference and sort of picking out pieces from an existing reference and just retelling that. So it's really almost like a review or a retell discussion prompt. But let's move to the next one. Now, the next one is on asking students to do a little more. It goes beyond identifying concepts or checking if they recognize a certain concept. We are now asking students to summarize or synthesize concepts. In this kind of example, we want students to list key points. So this is a bit more interpretive. Explain in your own words what the article or reading said, or summarize certain themes that came from a certain piece of content, right? So you can see that it requires a little bit more work from number one. And let's look at an example. So we're still on the topic of online learning. Now, the prompt changes from using the articles or references to support your response. In your own words, describe the online course development process, right? Now, number two, explain what makes a high-quality online course. So still, it's quite cognitive by nature, right? We're asking students to really talk about the content and summarize the content in their own words, in their own interpretation, but guided by these two questions. Okay, so hope you're following so far. We're going to go to the third one. The third one, number three, is personal reflections. If you want to move away your discussion from being highly content-based and starting to get students to infuse personal opinions or reflections, then your discussion might change, right? Your question has to change. So the example question here is, we're going to go through number one. In your own opinion, what makes online teaching effective? Right? I should have had a question mark there. I apologize for that. Describe a past experience where you felt an online course was effective. What made it effective? So you will see in these first two questions, the input or the content being presented by students to discuss comes from a personal background experience or a personal idea. It may or may not be that they will have to link to content or previous reading unless you specify. Right? You might want to combine number two and number three, and that's fine. But it's important today from this webinar for you to really take a step back and try to understand or recognize, what is my discussion prompt asking students to do? Is that really my goal? Right? So for the instructional designers at the CTL, we work with faculty very often who are doing online courses. And we see a lot of these questions very common. It's very common to ask students to watch a video and sort of share their feelings, share their opinion about it, what they think the video, how it impacted them. These are personal reflections, right? So at this point, recognize these three, and then we'll move to another three on the next slide, or maybe another two on the next slide. These are the lowest level. We're going to move our discussion higher. Okay. The next one, higher, is content curation. So now, aside from asking students possibly to check understanding or cite a personal opinion or reflection, you can encourage content curation through discussion. Here, you want students to find or share references or resources on a certain topic, or go beyond that and organize and classify these resources. So let's look at an example here, still on the topic of online learning. So here's the prompt, no? Do some research. Find an article or credible website that describes the major competencies of an instructor online. Post the link and summarize the main points. Notice here, the discussion work changes. Students now are not just using a prior reference, but has to go beyond, try to synthesize something, or sort of do some curation, evaluating other resources and bringing another resource in to contribute to the discussion. It could also be as simple as share resources that you found informative or useful about our topic this week. That's a little bit more informal, and it doesn't have to be that the students had to process that. They just found something and posted it. It's more of a making a list approach. So here we can add layers of challenge to the student, from simply reading something, watching something, and tell me what you learned about it, towards more open-ended discussion where students are now contributing something new and something different to what they're learning so far. Number 5, ideation. Ideation is now challenging students to become critical with what they're reading or what they're learning, what they're watching on videos, right? So we want students to begin some kind of more engaged discussion, asking students to propose sides between why or why not, if they agree or disagree with a scenario, what's the pros and cons of certain concepts. Maybe you engage them in a debate, or maybe you brainstorm several solutions to a problem, right? So the discussion, notice how the level of discussion you want students to engage in really depends on the intent, which is the purpose of ideation, and how you write the question. So let's look at some examples now on ideation questions. Just so you know, we're going to send you a handout with all of these after, so you don't have to worry about like having the examples. We have all the 8 types of discussions and example prompts in a handout that we will be emailing at the end of the session. Let's look at the example for ideation. Here's the question that might be engaging students in some kind of, taking a side maybe. Do some research. Let's compare WebEx and Zoom. Describe your position on which tool would best benefit online web conferences, right? What are the advantages or disadvantages of this? So here, the students are forced to be a bit more critical than just simply learning the concept. They have to take a stand and argue their position, and the more that they can argue a position, the more they understand the concept. A brainstorming question could be, how can national organizations provide support for instructors, parents, and students during online learning? Right? So this is an open question. Maybe it's contributing towards a future research. Maybe it's contributing towards a future project. But there is opportunity to use discussions beyond content and starting to move into project development. So then brainstorming could be a great idea for student groups to use through a discussion forum. Again, I will always stress, your objective for learning often falls into the intent. What do you want students to do? And how do you write a question that asks them to do it? So these are some examples here. The next one is, as we go higher through the chain of questions, we are now moving away from content and reflection towards creation and design and critique. So number 6 now is asking students to go beyond and having them create something and share that to the class. So number 6 is on creation and designing an artifact. That artifact can be anything, right? It could be a drawing, a framework, a concept map. It could be a proposal. It could be a manifestation of a improved process. Anything. It could be a framework. Asking students to create it their own and share this to the class so that that becomes their contribution to that week or that lesson. So an example could be, let's look at, we're still in online learning as an example. You propose the students are in a scenario, okay? Number one, if you were the university chancellor, right, so you want them to sort of be embodied in this role, draft a three-step process to effectively address the need for rapid online learning and explain this. So you will see that this is a little harder than the others much earlier, but and it might also take more time to do this response. If a read and response type of question might take students an hour or two, this question might take them more time, maybe several days, 3 hours over 2-3 days. So you want to be very cognizant that as you move through the chain of discussions and increasing the depth of work and increasing the complexity, increasing the critical thought, students may also need more time to respond to this and more so respond to each other. So maybe number 6 could be a discussion that lasts more than a week. Maybe it's a 2-week discussion where on the first week, the students are asked to post their idea for a 3-step. On the second week, the students can critique or respond to each other, right? Which is actually the example we have for number 7. Number 7 now can tie in very nicely to number 6, where you have some students do some original product like a framework, and then number 7 is have the students critique each other's work. But always remember, discussions are public, so any critique that is shared will be openly seen by the entire class. So let's take an example here. Assume now that you are no longer the chancellor, but you were hired as an online learning consultant. Use a certain SWOT analysis process to evaluate current solutions proposed by the university, right? So here you're introducing a tool. SWOT analysis stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You're giving them a tool to organize their ideas, but take it to a higher level to become to be a critique as a consultant. So they play a role again, just as number 6 did. So here the challenge is again more like there's a higher level of challenge. So we want to take note that these kind of questions, even though it seems simple, might actually take more time. As we move towards 6, 7, and 8, the last one, these questions could very much be assignments too, where the students do individual work. But the benefit of having a discussion is the work could be seen by others. They could get ideas from others, or they could get feedback and critique from others. So I've seen certain instances where discussions become sort of a draft to a bigger project, and then the students are still asked to submit a final version of the artifact, but that becomes the assignment submission individually. But the discussions become a space for the class to get feedback and to improve their work as they go through the process of designing something that is their own. And number 8, which is on really piggybacking on 6 and 7, is to improve an artifact. So here, seeing that there was an artifact and being a critique on it, here we are asking students to give recommendations on how to improve a certain artifact. So an example could be identify 2 recommendations to improve the online learning program or online learning framework, right? So it's nice that we could tie in 6, 7, and 8 together, actually. So if we look at the entire scope of what we've seen today, there is a range of questions that you could have for discussions, moving from lower level thinking to really high level critical thought, all the way to creation and critique. Okay, so we'll send you a handout on this. Now, we have a few more minutes, so we're going to go through some technical aspects on discussions. As you create discussions, it's important to write instructions that contribute to how students should post and how students should respond. Sometimes this is the management piece of a discussion forum. It's not so much the the pedagogical or curricular piece. So it's very important that you write instructions on how students post, what should they post, how should they post, when is their deadline, what is the expected deliverable or length of the post. Be very concrete with this so that you can set a standard across everyone. Similarly, you have to give clarity and guidelines on how they should respond. Should there even be a response? Number one, if there should be a response, you must give instructions on how to reply. How many responses should each person work on? Will it take too much of their time if they respond to everybody? If so, just set a minimum, like respond to 2 persons by certain date and time. Give an expectation on the type of response you want to have, and if you can encourage, ask students to respond considering content from the past. So try to connect different discussion forums together so that there's a little bit more active learning online. Here's an example of a post, the same thing that we had earlier, but now in Canvas format. So let's see. It says, the question says, critically consider how national organizations should provide support for parents, instructors, and students during online learning. Remember, we saw this earlier. Design a framework describing the main components or pillars for online learning at a university of your choice. So comes first, and then comes the instructions for how students must do the initial post and how students should reply. Okay, so there's always instructions given for the posting and instructions given for responses. And responses could be 2 things. They could respond directly to what was posted, or the students could be urged to consolidate common ideas among multiple classmates, and that becomes their response. So again, pushing the bar for a response. Okay, and to evaluate discussions, you can use rubrics, and discussions allow you to add a rubric. So one example of a rubric would be every discussion post can have an evaluation of the work done, the interaction that was done on top of the work, and timeliness of being able to submit. So these are just 3 sample criteria that we could have for every discussion forum. The last thing that we would say is every discussion has 1 due date. So if you have requirements to post on certain times, like if you ask the post to be on a Tuesday and all responses must be done by Thursday, the due date for the post is really set for Thursday. But you're managing the students' work by encouraging them to post a few days before and respond a few days after.